Have you ever caught yourself longing for a simpler time? A time when everything just felt easier? When kids played outside till the streetlights came on, neighbors were neighborly, and nobody was doom scrolling on their phones? Whether it's old family photo albums, retro Pinterest boards, or Instagram reels of vintage recipes, something about the good old days tugs at us. We see it on TV, in the movies, and in our politics. But what exactly are we remembering? What are we leaving out? And what's patriarchy got to do with it? Were the good old days really that good? Things used to be better. Back in my day, I remember adults saying stuff like that all the time when I was a kid. And I can't believe I'm old enough that I'm hearing myself say it sometimes now. But it does beg the question, when exactly were the good old days? For some, they're the 1970s. Disco, bell-bottom jeans, and a future where anything felt possible. Others think of the 1980s. Big hair, booming malls, and a sense of patriotic pride that permeated pop culture. And for an increasing many, it's the 1990s, the era of Pogs, Nickelodeon, and the feeling, in retrospect, that technology hadn't quite taken over our lives yet. Real. So real. Have you noticed that a lot of what I'm describing includes feelings? That's because the idea of the good old days is less about history and more about emotion. A moment in childhood, a person who made you feel safe, a time when you felt like you belonged. Psychologists call this feeling nostalgia, from the Greek nostos, meaning return home, and algos, meaning pain. Isn't that the perfect description of how nostalgia feels? And it turns out it's not just sentimental fluff. It actually does stuff to our brains. It helps our brains cope with stress, with loneliness, even identity confusion. But here's the catch. Nostalgia also messes with our memory. Thanks to a phenomenon called rosy retrospection, we tend to remember the past as being better than it actually was. Consider this famous study from 1997 where researchers followed college students on a 3-week bike trip. During the trip, 61% of cyclists reported that their experience was disappointing. They complained about things like sore muscles and bad weather. But then, as early as a week later, 89% reported positive memories of the trip. The sore muscles had faded, and the memories of disappointment faded too. Our nostalgia doesn't just remember the past, it edits it. It gives us a highlight reel, not a full picture. And certain ideologies, patriarchy for example, benefit from those incomplete pictures. But I'll come back to that in a minute. Nostalgia isn't the only thing shaping our perception of the past. Our sense of what history was like, what people wore, how families worked, is also shaped by media. A lot of the time, our TV shows, movies, and advertisements present a filtered version of the past that leaves out complexity and conflict. Instead of portraying the realities of the past, things like racism, sexism, economic struggle, or societal upheaval, they show us tidy living rooms, happy nuclear families, and neatly resolved moral lessons. I know my sense of the 1950s, for example, was largely informed by reruns of Happy Days and Leave It to Beaver. The Wonder Years made the 60s feel familiar and warm, and the Brady Bunch, and later That 70s Show, showed the 70s with no responsibilities and nonstop fun.
Far out.
And it isn't your favorite TV show's fault. Media like this was never meant to be a documentary, but that doesn't stop it from shaping our sense of history. A foundational study published in the Journal of Communication found that people who watched more television were significantly more likely to believe in a version of the world that matched television's portrayals, even when it contradicted reality. The more often they saw traditional family roles on screen, the more likely they were to assume that that was the norm in real life. So, when media shows us, say, an idealized version of the past with cheerful housewives and wise, pipe-smoking dads, it doesn't just entertain, it leaves a cognitive imprint. And when we combine our nostalgia-skewed memories with those idealized fictions, we end up with something more powerful and more misleading than either alone: a cultural memory, a shared story of the past that feels real, but isn't actually accurate. Now let's rewind to that era most often referenced in American minds when we mention the good old days, the 1950s. Soda fountains, sock hops, drive-in movies, stay-at-home moms in aprons, dads pulling into the driveway at 6 p.m. in a Buick. It's a decade that's been sold to us in vintage Technicolor. These post-war years are often held up as a model of stability and prosperity. And for some, it was. The U.S. economy was booming, wages were rising, suburban neighborhoods were growing fast. It was a time of marvelous new comforts. But only for some. The prosperity of the 50s was deeply unequal. While the post-war economy lifted many white families into the middle class, Black families were largely shut out, excluded from housing markets through redlining, denied access to high-paying union jobs, and systematically funneled into segregated schools and neighborhoods. Women were also shut out, legally, socially, and economically. They were pushed into domestic roles, discouraged from pursuing education, and still not admitted to some universities, and paid less for the same work as men, if they could get hired at all. And while these injustices were especially stark for marginalized communities, that doesn't mean every white, straight man was thriving either. A lot of them weren't. Writers like Jack Kerouac, John Steinbeck, and J.D. Salinger wrote extensively about the conformity and the materialism that was strangling even middle-class American men. And yet, in popular memory, the post-war years still shine. Even with all that complexity, even knowing what we know now, that era still holds a powerful grip on the American imagination. Why is that? Why does it continue to glow so brightly even when it leaves so much out? Part of the answer, as we discussed, is nostalgia and media. But another part of the answer is that this idyllic image of the 1950s isn't just a cultural memory, it's also a sales pitch. Politicians across decades have tapped into it to stir emotion and rally support. When Ronald Reagan promised to make America great again,
let's make America great again.
And when Donald Trump vowed to, you guessed it, make America great again, they weren't offering new ideas. They were offering a return. Not a return to a specific set of policies or even a return to a calendar date. It's the promise of returning to something that feels familiar, comforting, even if it never really existed. And this is where patriarchy really reveals itself, because the version of the past that we're being sold, the one built into campaign slogans and cultural myths, centers on a very specific structure of power. White men as breadwinners, women as homemakers, obedient children, strictly defined gender roles. According to some, rigid patriarchy was what made those days good in the first place. And here's the twist. Upholders of patriarchy don't just benefit from our mixed-up memories and nostalgia. They actively exploit them, especially among men. They tell men that they're losing out on the better days that their fathers and grandfathers enjoyed, that feminism took it from them, that if they could just go back to the obedient wife, back to the house with the picket fence, everything would feel right again. But that's a bald-faced lie, because the things people really long for, things like connected communities, economic security, happy families, and safe neighborhoods, those were not taken away by women or civil rights activists. Those were eroded by corporate greed, by political corruption, by a culture of domination and fear. So what do we do with all of this? Do we reject nostalgia entirely? Pretend nothing was ever good? No, that's not honest either. There were things worth missing. The standard of living was higher for many. We should bring that back, but for everyone. Some neighborhoods were safer. We should make that true for every community. The question is, can we take these good things with us without dragging old injustices along? Religious hawkers of good old days rhetoric might be surprised to read their very own Bible, which in Ecclesiastes 7:10 says, "Do not say, 'Why were the old days better than these?' For it is not wise to ask such questions." Why is it not wise? I think it's because longing for a false memory keeps us from building a real future. Instead of chasing some airbrushed version of our own history, let's do something smarter. Let's take stock of what really was good back then and recreate it in a modern context. Then let's name what was harmful and make sure we don't carry it into the future. Rampant inequity and forced gender roles? No thank you, we can leave those behind. In the end, we don't need to pretend everything used to be better or everything was worse. We just need to be honest about who we used to be and who we want to become, and how we can create good new days for all of us. Thanks so much for watching. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already.